What is happening, guys? Cowboy here, and welcome back once again to a set of Anthem build videos. As always, today we're going to be covering two builds, and these builds in particular are both for Ranger, for breaking your way into Masterwork 1 and slaughtering all of your foes. And to jump into our first one, we have an impact-based Ranger, and in true gun-centric fashion, I've gone ahead and modeled him after War Machine, and I gotta say I'm quite fond of this look. It's pretty fucking slick. But either way, to jump into it with an impact-based Ranger, you are going to be doing a ton of gunplay, very similar to a soldier from Mass Effect. And to that extent, one of the most important things for this build are going to be the weapons we have available. Now, in general, you're going to want the biggest light machine gun you can get. In my case, I have Renewed Courage, the upgraded version of Havoc, which isn't too bad because over the course of 20 seconds, I can basically get 100% recoil reduction, which is really nice for staying on the target and consistently hitting weak points. Another really good one, if you can get a hold of it, is the Cycle of Pain. It's an upgraded version of a Sledgehammer, which basically stacks up to 100% extra attack speed, so that one's pretty nice as well. Even the Relentless, which detonates combo explosions every time it reloads, isn't a bad choice, but basically put on the biggest light machine gun you got. You're going to be wanting to do just a ton of weapon damage. Alternatively, you could potentially run this with a shotgun, but it doesn't really make sense for this playstyle, so I would recommend light machine gun. As for our secondary, we're going with Death from Above, and the main reason for this is the Raptor Sense. While hovering, increases weak point damage by 65%, and that buff actually hangs around for a little bit, so even after you switch your weapons, you'll still have that buff up for your light machine gun. Now, I know for a while the king of the crop, if you will, was Avenging Herald, the 200% weapon damage increase while hovering. My understanding is that that is supposedly going to be patched to where that only works while you're using the Avenging Herald, and if that's the case, it wouldn't really make that much sense, you know? 200% of a heavy pistol really isn't that much. If it doesn't get patched, and that 200% applies to you using a different weapon, that would basically be your best in slot for secondary. I haven't gotten an Avenging Herald yet, so I can't even test if that does still work, but just some food for thought there. Moving on to our other gear, the Assault Grenade, all that goodness. The grenade launcher here, we're actually going to be running a Frost Grenade. Now, unfortunately, this is the only one I don't have a Masterwork for, but ultimately, in testing out everything, two big points for consideration here is one is we're taking a hit to our blast damage. So because of that, Gambit, Grand Opening, and Last Argument are all weaker than they could typically be. And to that extent, Frost Grenade isn't affected. It's considered a primer, which is nice. And probably the nicest thing about it, in my opinion, is the fact that freeze is really invaluable, especially once you start breaking into the Masterwork. And if something's frozen, it's not moving while you just drill its weak points full of bullets. One thing I want to discuss on here real quick is Grand Opening, which defeating enemies from above grants a 75% increase to weapon damage for 20 seconds. And while that sounds incredibly attractive, you have to defeat them from above with the Seeker Grenade, which is kind of wonky. If you ever use Seeker Grenade, you throw this out, a bunch of little grenades go out, and they go on after an enemy. So ultimately, I found it really inconsistent in getting off the ambush or skewer. You know, you're trying to get someone low enough to toss out this grenade to kill them, and then you're hoping that the grenades sneak onto your target instead of someone else. Ultimately, my recommendation is Frost Grenade over it, but if you're really good with timings, obviously this is just more damage that you're potentially leaving on the table. Now, as for our Assault Launcher here, Impact is applied to a lot of these. You get impact damage out of this one, the upgraded Seeking Missile. You get it out of Avenger's Boon. I believe you even get impact out of the Spark Beam as well. Even though it's considered fire, it's also qualifies as impact-based damage. So you have a little bit of flexibility here, but ultimately, the reason that I chose Avenger's Boon is this has that little blue icon there, and that means it has bonus damage to shields. This thing will absolutely crack the shit out of anything. If we're talking snipers, one Avenger's Boon, that shield's gone. If we're talking those big old beefy Dominion things that have frost launchers on their back, maybe two, that thing's shield's gone. So if you can get one of these, it's really, really nice to pick up. Even if you don't have the Avenger's Boon version, just having a Pulse Blast works really well here. I also will say that I do like the Seeking Missile a lot, and I think flavor-wise it fits into the build, but this is currently bugged right now. Basically what happens when you use this is you need to kill an enemy with that missile itself. If that missile detonates a combo and they die to the combo, which most of the time they do, the effect of it resetting will not proc. So to that extent, Avenger's Boon is great here. Crack shields. Moving on. To our components. Now, I want to go into the most important ones for this build first, and that is going to be one increasing your gun damage, and one increasing your impact damage, and lastly, if you can get a tactical advantage, I've actually found this one to be pretty nice. You're getting 35% on the heat threshold. Weak points will lower that build up even more, and this allows you to hover pretty damn long as you keep firing. You're not exactly Storm, but you can stay in battle for almost up to a minute as long as you're smart about hitting weak points with it. And then airborne advantage, obviously we lose blast damage by 20%, but we get 50 to impact damage, which is also going to boost our weapon damage. And then of course defensive bulwark, increase all weapon damage by another 25%. As for the other ones, it's really whatever you have available. In particular, I have on this one increasing the assault launcher recharge by 35%, just getting those up a little bit sooner. Badge of devastation, performing a large hit streak will add 1 ultimate charge, and then tip of the spear, just some combo damage every now and then. The main reason I like this a lot is because of the 40% armor restore to allies. And while we're on the note of badge of devastation, one thing I want to point out here is this large hit streak adding 1 ultimate charge. When it says 1, that doesn't mean a full ultimate. It basically just adds a little tick to your ultimate bar, but it's enough of a tick that it's noticeable, and especially when you are just filling the target with bullets, it actually adds up pretty fast. And even though you're not doing a ton of combos with this build, you'll probably find that your ultimate comes up more frequently than you would expect it to. Moving on from there into the support gear, Bulwark Point is my personal favorite as Ranger. I use this in both my builds. I mean, this thing is great. It can soak one of those giant death balls that the Titan spits out. It's enough that you can drop it down and get a res off. You can drop it down and get objectives. I'm just a big-ass fan of Bulwark Point. But if you want to go for muster, that's also on you. I always like keeping support open-ended, kind of dealer's choice, if you will. And that's really all there is to it for this build. So the main tenets, to sum it up, of course, go for a big light machine gun, have something that can crack shields, namely the blaster there, and then of course impact damage and then weapon damage. So jumping right on into it, you can already see the just sheer damage we're getting out from that Raptor sense from using our 3-round burst rifle. We're hitting 2,800 damage per bullet, and it's a 3-round burst, so we're looking at close to 9,000 damage going out. Light machine gun, we're seeing bullets in the range of roughly 500 damage a hit. You know, every now and then throwing out the pulse to crack a shield, throwing down a frost to free stuff up. And it's a very straightforward build to play. You know, freeze some stuff, detonate a combo here or there. I think an important thing to mention, of course, is that the way the Ranger's combo works is it does 50% bonus damage. It stays single target, whereas, you know, Storm spreads the aura and Colossus does an AoE. But Ranger's ability to, I guess, crack stuff through his combos is quite effective. So with that in mind, even in a build that is based around impact and gunplay, it is still worth detonating combos when you get the chance to, because you're going to see big damage go off through those combos. And ultimately, this is where this build really begins to shine. You know, you have something frozen down and you're just hovering in front of its face with a light machine gun, just drilling it with bullets. And it's pretty damn satisfying. You know, especially when you consider the pulse blast. You know, we're able to blow through shields, freeze this guy on up, gun his face down. Just super straightforward, very easy build to play. And on top of that, it's very easy to pick up. Even if you don't have a ton of masterworks, this build isn't really dependent on them. You know, like I said, the biggest things here are going to be your gun damage, your impact damage, and then just weaving in everything together. And you can get by pretty damn efficiently. And in a classic case of saving best for last, here we are with my ultimate Ranger. Now, the reason I say ultimate isn't because it's the best around, but because this is a build focused entirely around optimizing your ultimate, building it up, and dumping out those sweet, sweet missiles. And to that extent, of course, I went with that flashy-ass Iron Man skin. And while we're on that note, for those curious, the main way to pull this off is obviously going to be custom red paint, but under your secondary, you're going to want aged metal, and you're going to have to unlock brass with rep, which actually gives it a very nice gold type look. But to jump right into it, I've said this is an ultimate build, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about what makes it an ultimate build. And we have two big factors here. The first is going to be the masterwork version of the frag grenade, Last Argument. Now I want to talk about this a little bit because it says 700% ultimate charge, and that's a little bit unclear to a lot of people. So what it does in particular is when your grenade hits, you'll add 700% of what it would typically gain, just regular, you know, non-masterwork version. So, you know, your grenade goes off, you get a little bit of charge. If you happen to hit an enemy that's primed, you'll get a bit more charge. If you hit a bunch of enemies, you get a buttload of charge. And so if you take what's already a buttload and you increase it by 700%, basically you get like half of your ultimate bar per grenade if you play this right. So to that extent, because combos are going to be so important to this build in our assault launcher, we're going to be running with the tactical onslaught, the upgraded version of venom darts. Now the great thing about this is it permanently gains an extra charge, and venom darts already has 2 charges, so this basically gives us 4 venom darts, which means you can run on into a group, dart, 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 toss out your frag, drop out your ultimate. It's really that easy, and it's pretty delicious at that. Moving into our weapons, once again, Divine Vengeance is going to be coming out because even though it's a fire explosion, it's considered blast as well and boosted up by the increases to blast that we have. And then for our secondary, anytime we run into an enemy that's not going to be weak to combos or we're not going to be able to do our blast damage effectively to, of course, the best thing to dump out damage is just going to be a heavy light machine gun. Now, I've said blast damage a couple times, and let's jump into components and explain why. So one of the main tenets of this build is going to be getting crossed arms or the masterwork version of this, because you're going to get an increase to blast damage, but you're going to take a decrease to your impact damage. As far as secondary, you're once again going to want the combo damage increase. In this case, Tip of the Spear, an excellent choice because of the armor restoration. Now, aside from that, the rest is a little bit more flexible, but there is some more synergy going on here. Picking up Defensive Bulwark for the weapon damage increase, that'll help to counter out the 20% loss to impact, so our weapons aren't too negatively impacted. And then with Elemental Ops, because the rifle we're using does an explosion, and this increases fire damage, even though that explosion is already increased by blast, it's also increased by fire. So the explosions that we're able to do just hitting people with Divine Vengeance are disgusting. Like, I mean, I'm talking just shredding. People's faces are getting melted off. Moving on from there, General's Favor, just make that assault launcher charge even faster. And then, of course, Badge of Devastation. Once again, that 10 health streak that'll hit an ultimate charge. So we got this pumping up our ultimate. We got the combo damage synergy. We got the blast damage. And then, of course, all of this ties in with the centerpiece, really, of this build, and that is the Masterwork Last Argument. Now, a couple things I want to point out with this build that I think are worth discussing. You do have Blast Missile, which does blast damage. Both Avenger's Boon and Recurring Vengeance are considered impact, so I wanted to pass over them. And even though, why do I even have this? Even though Spark Beam totally fits into the flavor of Iron Man, it is also considered, negatively is impacted by impact. Even though it's considered fire. So once again, just had to pass it up. And on top of that, it doesn't prime or anything, whereas this I can prime 4 people. So on Blast Missile in particular, even though this is getting increases from this build, ultimately it's just not that good. You know, in a game where combos are kind of king, having a move that doesn't detonate or prime is pretty disappointing. And to be honest, I think in the future we're going to see some big changes to stuff like this, whether they make the abilities able to detonate or they add significant damage. Because as it stands right now, an ability that can't detonate and can't prime is basically useless across every build in the game, I think. And that's all there is for this one. Once again, support gears, whatever you want. We went with Bulwark Point. So just to recap the main things here, most important thing you're going to need, once again, is going to be Last Argument, the upgraded frag grenade for that 700% ultimate charge. And then your main points of synergy are going to be increased blast and crossed arms, Tip of the Spear for combo damage, and then Badge of Devastation for even more damage coming in off of those hit streaks. So in gameplay, this basically just comes down to pooping out your ultimate and then throwing out combos. Fun fact, you can also do your ultimate while flying, like you just saw. Just the biggest thing is make sure you pop it off soon enough, so that of course you can get as many enemies as possible with that hit. And already you can see, I've been talking for like, what, 15 seconds here, and my ultimate bar is almost already refilled again. I mean, the only reason it stopped filling is because I ran out of enemies to hit. And that's what's so beautiful about this build. Like, a Colossus is still my favorite Javelin, but out of all the Javelins, the Ranger ultimate is just super appealing to me. There's something about a volley of missiles. It brings me back to my days of like Armored Core and Mech Warrior, and it's super satisfying. And this build executes it constantly. So if you have a hard-on for the Ranger ultimate like I do, this is probably going to be right up your alley. I also briefly mentioned how we have the explosions coming off from our weapon, and I think it's important to take a look at those as well. Certain bosses, they work great on, certain bosses, not so much. A good example is the Ash Titans. The explosions won't do extra damage, but something like this Ascari, you know, once we get that leg plate off, which is right about in a second here, you'll notice I target it. Like, look at this guy, for example. Look at that health! Look at the chunking! But take a look at this Ascari. I'm going to start hitting this guy's leg plate, and honestly, his health is just going to melt. You're just going to see massive chunks come out, because on top of the damage we're getting out of our gun, we're also putting out a ton of damage via those explosions that are going off that are getting bonuses from both blast as well as the fire damage increase we have on that one augment. And all in all, it really is an absolutely beautiful build. Look at that, 6,400 damage blasts on top of the 1,500 plus damage bursts. It's just crazy, baby. You can't beat it. So all in all, that is pretty much going to wrap this one up. Some final closing points I want to point out are, especially with this build, one thing to keep in mind is that acid is incredibly potent against armored enemies, and it's actually going to increase the damage they take. So you're really just going to be blowing stuff apart. But either way, that's going to wrap this one on up. I'm currently working on Interceptor. I have it pretty much geared up, so that video should be soon. But until then, thanks for coming by. If you found the builds awesome, make sure to drop a like, and otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.